In November 2021, Mint, a fintech startup backed by Alibaba and Globe Telecom, was the first made-in-Philippines unicorn. Then 5 months later, Maya, a competing fintech startup backed by Tencent and PLDT, was made the second unicorn. Despite the good news, comparatively, the Philippines is significantly slower to the startup scene than its peers. Indonesia, Vietnam, Japan, and Korea achieved their first unicorn before 2016. Today, we'll learn why, in theory, the Philippines should have many more startups but never did, and what changed for the industry. From OneUp Media, this is Empires. The Philippines have several fundamentals that would, in theory, create an explosive startup scene. It has the second largest population within the region at 116 million, with one of the highest English literacy rates within Asia. This gives a sizable part of the population the English advantage. Very often, the startups across the region draw inspiration in the West. For example, Uber is reinterpreted as Gojek, Tata, Didi, and Grab, while Amazon is reinterpreted as Alibaba, Shopee, Lazada, and Tokopedia. Some would have even spent time in Silicon Valley, like Indonesia's version of Expedia, where all three founders met in the United States. The English advantage allows markets which are more isolated to leapfrog the ideation stage of a startup by contextualizing tried and proven applications in the West. In theory, because the Philippines have the highest number of people who could understand English, they should easily have many more Western-inspired startups. Given the population size, these startups can focus only within the Philippines and still have a large enough market. Why did it take so long for the startup scene to emerge? Almost 80% of all startups founded after the dot-com era relied on data to become successful, and this was what the Philippines lacked the most. Largely because of the President Ferdinand Marcos's era from 1965 to 1986. Ferdinand Marcos came from a political family that traced back to the early 1900s, but few were as successful as him. He was incredibly charismatic, with reportedly over 33 medals and awards during his time in the military. Through his speeches, he had galvanized the country by acknowledging the power of the people, that by their hands they could remake destiny, not just of their own, but of the country's, provided that they vote for him. Entrusting their destiny to Ferdinand, the people elected him as president, who by most accounts seemed to lead a successful first term. He was spending heavily on infrastructure projects and vastly improved the English literacy rates in the Philippines. But quickly, things started to seem amiss. The country's debt was rising, and many projects weren't translating to the economy's progress. Today, we know that Ferdinand had taken up long-term debt to fund current projects, of which many were simply aesthetic in nature. By the early 1970s, public discontent had risen, and to exert control, Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law and nationalized industries. To be fair, it's not completely far-fetched to nationalize, given that a country would want to protect their national resources. But in Ferdinand's case, each nationalized industry was offered to a friend and awarded a government contract that seemed to give outsized investments almost instantly. It was assumed that if Ferdinand favored your industry and you aren't just set for life. Your children and your grandchildren can live off the money earned off these contracts. One such industry that benefited was PLDT, Philippines' long-distance telephone company. Under Ferdinand Marcos's favor, PLDT was well protected, and it began to breed a culture of complacency. There was nothing to innovate, as there was no competition. It also became known that PLDT would prioritize the allies of Ferdinand, while the common people suffered poor connection. It was also well known that PLDT practiced anti-competitive behavior by slowing down connection of any competitor who relied on their landlines. A combination of Ferdinand Marcos's rule, protectionism, and anti-competitive behavior had set the Philippines back while the rest of the region progressed technologically. By 1992, landline setups could take as long as 15 years in Metro Manila, the nation's capital. Gradually, even countries beyond the Philippines were aware of PLDT's poor service, which culminated in a statement by the then Singapore Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew, who joked, 98% of Filipinos are waiting for a telephone, while the other 2% are waiting for the dial tone. Without a robust technology infrastructure, few Filipinos could take advantage of any Western knowledge that they acquired, and the startup scene remained non-existent. After the Ferdinand Marcos's era, an executive order was passed that forcibly privatized the telecommunications sector and allowed innovation via competition. It took another 10 years before a contender could rival PLDT. Named Globe Telecom, it became the nation's second biggest telecommunications company. But even then, PLDT had over twice the number of users and operating cash flow, with about 4 times the market value as Globe. Through large investments and company culture intervention, Globe would eventually be equals to PLDT. During their war, they ushered the Philippines into the information age, where data was finally reliable enough for entrepreneurs to disrupt the legacy companies. But by then, the world had turned its attention to Indonesia, a country with 300 million people, but more importantly, the largest diaspora of Chinese immigrants. Around the early 2010s, the 2 largest China tech behemoths were Tencent and Alibaba. The former owns WeChat, the largest chat messenger in the world, and Alibaba owns Alipay, the largest e-wallet in the world. During this time, the China market had saturated, so they started turning their attention outside of China. Their choice of Southeast Asia was by elimination, because America and Europe had Western tech behemoths, Russia and the Middle East had slow growth, while India, though promising, would require many local partners. With only Africa and Southeast Asia remaining, they picked the one with the largest Chinese population and closest to China. If the Philippines was technologically savvy at this point, they could possibly have benefited from the inflow of Chinese investment that then drew the rest of the world in. But it wasn't, so the ship sailed. Instead, local ventures were set up, such as Globe owned 917 Ventures and PLDT owned Voyager Innovations, but they could never throw money like Tencent nor Alibaba. By the time it was ready, Indonesia had become a money-sucking war zone, which left little to the Philippines. It's also worth knowing that colloquially, the majority of Filipinos seem to perceive working outside of the Philippines as their definition of success. If this is true, it leaves the country more brain drain and also makes them less likely to start a business within their home country. So what sparked the startup scene? In February 2017, Ant Financial, the financial arm of Alibaba, which owns Alipay, made an undisclosed investment into Mint. In 2004, Mint launched Gcash, which originally was a text-to-transfer funds service. For context, a good 10 million Filipinos work overseas, which was why Mint wanted to solve for remittance. But it never really took off. So instead, they iterated and eventually created an e-wallet. Before the fintech wars, the majority of Filipinos were unbanked, as they lacked the documents, money, or didn't even see the need for one. With a real problem to be solved, existing technology in place, it caught the attention of Ant Financial, who believed that with their expertise in Alipay, they could supercharge adoption of the e-wallet within the Philippines. The Ant Financial investment naturally invited the attention of Tencent, that then invested in Gcash's competitor, Maya, another e-wallet, in 2018. This began a quiet war in 2019, which eventually exploded when COVID-19 hit. In March 2020, the country was forced to embrace digital payments, sparking a fierce competition between Gcash and PayMaya. PayMaya launched 3 campaigns, including Don't Pay Cash, Pay Maya, and focused on helping small businesses digitize their operations. Meanwhile, Gcash blasted their promotions on overdrive and achieved a staggering 65% growth in downloads. But the real game changer came when the government distributed over 16 billion pesos of relief funds via these apps, forcing the public to download them. Then Christmas hit, and both companies ran gamified campaigns like Pay Maya Ginaldo and Merry Gcash. By the end of 2020, Gcash held the lead with 33 million users, while PayMaya trailed close behind at 28 million. The startup scene was thus born. So what does it look like today? The Gcash and Maya war eventually drew the attention of other investors, and soon, Y Combinator, the accelerator famed for Airbnb, Reddit, and Stripe, chose to back 8 startups. Then came 500 Global's Andreessen Horowitz, Founders Fund's Peter Thiel, Tinder's Justin Mateen, and Bedrock Capital. While foreign investors came rushing in, local families also established their own venture fund. The Ayala Group, ranked 8th richest in the Philippines at 2.55 billion, started the Ayala Corporation Technology Innovation Venture Fund. The Gokong Ways, ranked 4th at 3.1 billion, started the JG Digital Equity Ventures, JGDEV. As reported by Bain, in total, 73 deals were made in 2020, only to increase by 70% to 125 deals in 2021. The overall startup gross merchandise value grew roughly by 47% to 16 billion USD and is expected to reach over twice its value to around 35 billion in 2025. Naturally, a sizable portion of investments are in digital financial services, about 70% of funding value in 2021. The biggest winners are still Gcash and Maya, whose war still rages on. Today, Gcash's user base grew to an estimated 60 million with a valuation of $2 billion, 40% higher than Maya. By the way, if you want to know more about the thrilling fintech showdown in the Philippines, then you might want to check out our podcast, Empires. In each episode, we take you on an epic audio journey, exploring the origin stories, monumental successes, and colossal setbacks of the titans behind Gcash and PayMaya, Globe, and PLDT. But wait, there's more. We've an extensive catalog where we unravel the rise of industry giants like Sony and the transformation of unicorns like Tencent into unstoppable monopolies. Alright, that's all from me. Thank you for watching, and I hope we've left you with something to take back from the video. Till the next one, from One Up Media, this is Empires.